Okay, so you're listening to the moments when Jessica Heeringa disappeared. That was the last place anybody ever saw her, the Exxon Mobil gas station. Let's break this all down right now with criminal defense attorney Saam Zangeneh. Saam, great to have you here on Law and Crime.
Good to be back.
Now, we've covered cases where there's no body before. I'm curious from your perspective, charging Willis with kidnapping and murder without a body, is that a circumstantial evidence case? Is that tough to prove?
Yeah, of course it's tough. Because you can't definitively prove what happened to the person. They could have gone someplace, they wanted to maybe drop off the face of the earth on their own accord. Juries like to see tangible evidence. They don't like circumstantial cases, especially when someone's life's on the line.
Then again, who disappears just randomly in the middle of a shift at a gas station job? But the other side of this case, which is so weird, isn't this almost like 3 trials in one? They were trying to take evidence from other crimes that he was implicated in and trying to cast light on him in this one?
You know, the funny thing is, like in the criminal justice system, you're not supposed to be able to do that, okay? But there's a mechanism for prosecutors and defense attorneys to be able to use prior bad acts to show consistency motive. There's, you know, each state differs in federal court, obviously. The language is different, but in essence, the message is the same. You're not supposed to be guilty of something because you've done it in the past, yet the prosecution can use prior bad acts to suggest that you have a consistent motive or something to that effect. So it's super damaging.
Right, a pattern here. If you tried to kidnap a teenager and he shot a young jogger, you could see which way they're going here. Tell you what, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to cover more of the Jeffrey Willis trial. We'll be right back.
And were you present when that K-9 officer and the K-9 were actually searching that area?
Yes, I was. Trooper Bush came out. He had the dog at the time. Gave him a description of what we were looking for, you know, the background on it. And then from that point on, he searched the areas, both, you know, north, east, west, south, being the center point would be the gas station. That goes into a field. And then along a fence line that has a water, a pond, I'd say, and then along the railroad tracks, and then across the street. And
did the trooper or the K-9 give you any indication or positive information about potential direction of travel or anything like that?
He basically said at the end, I mean, he was out there for quite a while, and as we were doing our investigation and I was interviewing people, he came back. I don't know, we're talking a couple hours. He said basically he felt that the scent ended right where we have the blood and we have the batter or the cover to the laser sight. He said he did not find any scent out in that field and then in the front at all.
So Jessica Heeringa's purse, her jacket, wallet, keys, cash, they're all left behind at this gas station. There's blood, batteries, appears to be a sight cover from a gun. Now, Saam, if I'm listening to this in the Jeffrey Willis case and I'm on his defense team, that argument that Jessica just walked up and left and went on with her life and did something, it's kind of hard to argue that. So do they go forward and say, hey, wait, maybe it wasn't Jeffrey Willis, maybe it was somebody else that took her?
You know, it's a difficult question to answer, and I'll tell you why, okay? I would do what my team would do is we would look more at the specifics. One of the things that I would absolutely explore is whose blood was at the scene. I know that there's blood there, but the follow-up questions would be, could they make a causal connection between that blood stain and the missing person, okay? Because regardless of the fact that there's blood there, you have to show whose blood that is. And I don't think they've done that at this point in the trial.
That's a good point. And maybe that's the way that they ultimately go. And it's a very strange case, like as you said, when you don't have the body and you don't know what happened to this woman because her body has never been found. But one of the weird things that happened that night was there was a strange van that was seen leaving the gas station. And you're going to hear how the prosecution ties that van to Willis. But let's talk about that van right now from Susan Follett. She worked at the Exxon station with Jessica, and she testified in the Jeffrey Willis case. Let's listen to what she had to say.
A silver van.
Okay. And where do you see the silver van?
It's in the parking lot, traveling east toward the store.
Okay. And could you take that stick in front of you and kind of show the jury where you first
see this van?
Around about here.
Okay. And you said it's traveling east, so it's traveling towards the gas station, is that right?
Yes.
And you guys are traveling in the same direction on Sternberg Road?
Correct.
Okay. Now, as you near the gas station, where is this van?
Like the whole time, they're just slightly in front of me. I'm back here. They're just slightly in front of me. They're pulling in here. I'm still going here. But at the back of the van, we're about parallel, probably because I'm going a little faster than he is at this point.
Okay.
At that time, as we're right here on Sternberg, I see the van come down and make a U-turn. And as he was facing the road, he turned off their lights.
Okay. Which lights?
Their headlights.
Okay. And you see where this van goes after the headlights go out?
They did a U-turn and back behind the building. Whether or not they were going toward the building straight, I'm not sure.
Okay. So as the Exxon station is kind of coming out of your view, you see this van turning behind the station itself?
Yes.
Okay. Now, as you're passing the station, do you remember or have any recollection of seeing any vehicles parked in the parking lot of the station?
Just Jessica's.
You saw Jessica's?
Right up front.
And did you know the vehicle that Jessica drove?
Yes.
Let me show you a photograph here real quick. Just follow. This is People's Exhibit 81. You recognize that car?
They do.
Whose car is it?
Jessica's.
All right, that's the car you saw parked? Is that a yes?
Yes.
All right. So you see that happen. What's going on in your mind?
Something wasn't right.
Okay. And what did you decide to do?
When we got to Harvey and Sternberg, I just looked at my ex-husband and said, something doesn't feel right, I'm going back. And he said, okay.
Okay.
Okay, I want to talk more about what she saw. Now, Saam, this van becomes a huge factor in this case because they're going to try and say this van belonged to Jeffrey Willis. And how do we know that? Because maybe that was the same van that he used when he tried to kidnap a teenager, and maybe that was the same van that he used when he killed Rebecca Blech. I'm curious about that factor in this case. What do you think about it?
Man, it sure does hurt. I'll tell you what, that's how they're connecting the dots. They're using information from two prior instances where they're trying to show that he has a consistent motive or consistent MO, modus operandi, where he uses this death vehicle to be able to perpetuate these horrific, heinous, aggressive crimes. And so, and then you have this witness on the stand. Man, if I was the defense, I would have gone crazy because she's like, I've got a gut feeling and my spidey sense is taking up. That's speculation. That's the kind of testimony you don't want a witness to be able to get up there and kind of showcase in front of a jury because jurors eat that stuff up. And you gotta kind of like force feed the fork down because that's hurting your client.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, and you can imagine what the jury might be thinking in that exact moment. We'll take a break now, though, but when we come back, we're going to continue on with this trial into the investigation and how the prosecution tried to tie Willis to this crime. Stay tuned here on Law and Crime. That list, which a handwriting expert said was written by Jeffrey Willis, was found crumpled up in a trash can in the garage of Willis's grandfather's house. Think about that for a sec. Let's continue on with Detective Zachary Sparks from the Norton Shores Police Department, and then we'll talk about all this. Take a look.
117.
This would be from standing in the same position of the prior picture. This would be me turning 90 degrees to the right and facing east. The landing of the stairs would be back over here to the left of that picture.
And finally, 118. What are we looking at here?
This is a picture of cleaning materials that were gathered by investigators and set in that area of the room prior to me taking the picture.
What was the significance of collecting all that?
It seemed unusual that there was so many cleaning materials gathered in one corner of the room.
So if I understand it correctly, the white bottles are what?
Clorox bleach.
And then the Tide and the other boxes are what?
The bottle is a Tide laundry detergent with bleach, and then there's 6 additional boxes of Tide with bleach powder.
Okay. So all those containers contain bleach, essentially.
At some point, they were all empty.
It's a good answer to a bad question. Prior to them being empty, those containers had the component of bleach in them. In some fashion, whether it be Clorox bleach, or Tide with bleach.
Yes, they were all identified as a product that included bleach.
Okay, and you kind of answered, but did any of those containers either contain liquid or powder?
The 4, well, they were empty at the time that we were observing them.
And that's kind of the question I'm looking for. When you collected them, did any one of those Clorox bleach bottles, for example, have any more bleach in it?
No, they were empty.
The Tide liquid detergent, did that have any detergent with bleach left in it?
No.
And I think it's 4 or 5 boxes of Tide powder, did any of those have any of the powder left over?
No.
They were all empty?
Yes.
Some interesting items there found at Jeffrey Willis's grandfather's house. Let's play a game. Let's say you represent Jeffrey Willis. Let's start off with that note. So that note, that list of all of those items that were just listed out, which an expert came on and said was handwritten by Jeffrey Willis, why would he have a note written talking about neck restraints, cameras, vibrators, gasoline, matches, and that's just some of them. I haven't even mentioned the French tickler. Why would a note like that be written and then crumpled in the trash?
Woo! Isn't that the million-dollar question? I'll tell you what, when you were watching the video, and it was near the tail end of when they were reading off the list, the camera panned over to the defendant and his defense attorney, and the defense attorney had to say it. I'm sorry. Yeah, listen, super damaging, unbelievably disturbing, okay? The list read like home invasion, rape kit, just like the mind of a demented person. And this guy wrote a checklist. Listen, you know what? As a defense attorney, all you can do is attempt to minimize this and to maximize what the prosecution's missing, which is a body, But, bro, super, super damaging information.
I don't want to say that's the smoking gun, but it seems like when you're in law school and they talk about a smoking gun, you have a list of items for a specific event right there.
Right, really bad.
Now let's focus on the grandfather's house. So they looked in the basement of the grandfather's house. They find Tide, Clorox bottles. Now we see, there's so many cleaning supplies. These cleaners contain bleach. You and I both know what the prosecution's trying to go at for here, but is there a way to argue against that?
I mean, listen, just speaking kind of in a bubble, maybe you see if the grandfather had like a history of like being obsessive compulsive, if there's witnesses that show that he keeps a very clean yard and does maintenance and this, that, and the other. But I mean, listen, these are all extremely damaging things. I mean, listen, that's his laundry list of things to do when he kidnaps somebody, and that's where he takes them to torture them and do unbelievably horrific sex acts to them before he kills them.
Yeah, and those containers were all empty. And Jessica Heeringa, her body has never been found. Let's put 2 and 2 together right here, and we'll see. We're going to take a break. When we come back, more evidence against Jeffrey Willis will be presented. Stay tuned. All right, everybody, we'll jump back into Jeffrey Willis in a second, but we have an update for you in the Harvey Weinstein saga. First up, cameras were not allowed in that pretrial hearing in New York. We were hoping for that, but that's okay. It was a very short hearing, and we can confirm right now the judge will not dismiss the indictment against Weinstein. The charges will remain, the case will move forward, and a new court date new court date is set for March 7th. Saam, as we listen to this, are you surprised that the case is moving forward? Because it seemed Ben Brafman, who already got one of the counts dismissed up a few months ago, had some good evidence that these charges should be dismissed.
You know what? I don't disagree that he's done an unbelievably fantastic job, but the standard to get cases dismissed is extremely high, and it's an extremely arduous thing to do. So while the one case was dismissed, they were able to show direct evidence that the lead detective in that case had ordered one of the purported victims to delete messages, so to taint the evidence. I don't know if they have such a smoking gun like we referred to earlier with regards to the other counts. And, you know, judges usually, when they have a situation like this, when they're dealing with police or prosecutorial misconduct, the standard has to be extremely high for the judge to dismiss a case, because in essence what the judge is saying is that the police and prosecutorial misconduct outweighs the ability of a victim to be able to move forward. So I'm not surprised that the judge allowed this to move forward, but I guarantee you the defense is going to have some strong arsenal of punches to throw at the prosecution come trial time.
Yep, and we're going to cover it as soon as we have more information as this unfolds in the next few months. He faces 5 felony charges, very serious. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll continue with Jeffrey Willis. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Law and Crime, everybody, here on Victims Speak Day. We're covering all those trials where the victims had an opportunity to speak out against the defendants in open court. And we're going to cover that a little bit more right now in the Jeffrey Willis case. But before we do that, let's bring back in criminal defense attorney Saam Zangeneh to talk a little bit more about what's been happening so far. And Saam, we can't talk about Jeffrey Willis without talking about what we just heard, which was on his computer. Why would a guy who had nothing to do with this have all of these torture, necrophilia videos? Why would he have so many images of Jessica Heeringa? Why would he be so interested in that case if he was so innocent?
Yeah, I mean, as a defense attorney, this is what we call a prosecutor's wet dream. It's a cornucopia of evidence, and none of it helps the defense. I mean, listen, the investigation in this case was fantastic by law enforcement. They were able, I mean, the fact that they found that note in his grandfather's basement in the trash, the fact that this guy kept such incriminating evidence, not just laying around, but memorialized on his laptop, you know, shame on him, obviously, for being so lackadaisical and protecting his crime. But yeah, listen, I mean, this is just an overwhelming amount of evidence, and you even heard it from his wife. I mean, you're right. You hit the nail on the head. I think that she came across as a victim as well. And I think that the jury ate that up, and you see this guy sinking quicker than the Titanic, and nobody's worried about it.
Well, we're going to play a little bit more of the trial, and it should be noted, as you said, this is still a circumstantial evidence case. There's nothing directly tying him to Jessica Heeringa's murder, disappearance, kidnapping, anything like that. But when you match up the van, the crime scene, this evidence on his computer, the evidence at the grandfather's house, you can see a story building up. But one of the interesting things about this case, and Saam and I are going to talk a little bit more about it, is that the victim had an opportunity to speak. Who am I talking about? I'm talking about Madison Nygaard. She is a young girl who claims that she was almost kidnapped by Jeffrey Willis, and she was allowed to testify in this trial. Let's see what she had to say.
With you?
Yes.
Now, as it came time, and I don't know, I mean, how long, just so we get kind of a reference, approximately how long did this party go on for?
I can't remember. I was there all night.
You were there all night?
Yeah.
So we're not talking about a couple hours?
No.
Several hours?
Yes.
Now, at some point in time, and I don't know if you made a decision, or was there a decision made that it was time to go?
Yes, I asked to go.
You asked to go?
Yeah.
And you were going back where?
To my house.
All right. Now, your original plan, this Jake fellow that was going to take you home, did that pan out?
No.
What happened?
His friend had locked himself in the car with the car keys, and we tried waking him up, and he wouldn't wake up.
Okay. Was there any other method of transportation method that you had?
No.
All right. So what'd you do?
started walking.
Now, were you familiar at all with the area?
No.
And did you have any other, besides your house, did you have any other relatives that lived in the area?
I knew my friend Jalen lived kind of close by.
Jalen lived close by?
Yes.
And any other relatives?
Yeah.
Aunts, uncles, grandmas?
No.
No?
Not that I recall. No.
All right. Now, when you left the house on foot, were you with someone or by yourself?
By myself.
And do you recall at all, Ms. Nygaard, whether or not it was nighttime or daytime?
The sun was coming up.
Sun was coming up?
Yeah. Yes.
Yes. All right. Now, as you're making your way back, are you aware at all of what road you were on?
No.
Okay. What happens next?
Jeffrey Willis pulled up.
Okay. Now, did you know Mr. Willis?
No.
Did you have any idea who he was?
No.
And this is, I guess, describe for the jury. Is this you described the sun was coming up? How? What's the conditions of this?
It was bright out.
All right. And did Mr. Willis approach you on foot?
No.
How?
In his van.
Now, could you describe with the van, please?
It was silver van.
In Victim Speaks Out Day, here on Law and Crime, you are hearing from a young woman who says that she was almost kidnapped by Jeffrey Willis. She was allowed to testify in the Jessica Heeringa murder and kidnapping case. Let's continue on with her testimony.
Somebody else in the room is talking to the officers right now, okay? How old are you?
I'm 16.
You're 16?
Yes.
Okay, did you actually get in the vehicle?
Yes, he told me.
So you were in the vehicle and jumped out?
Yes.
Alright, can you spell your last name for me?
I just heard so much pain.
Did he tell you to get in the van when he pulled the gun?
No.
No. When you got into the vehicle, why were you in the vehicle?
To use his phone.
What was that?
To use his phone so I can call my mom.
Okay, you stopped, were you walking and got in the
Yes,
vehicle?
I've been walking for 5 hours.
Okay, where were you walking from?
Looking for Eric.
From where?
Looking for Eric.
Okay, we do have an officer on the way, okay? I just need to keep asking some questions so we can know what happened.
My mom.
Okay, Saam, so you said in the beginning of our program you usually wouldn't be permitted this kind of witness, right? To have a witness come forward and say, hey, in this kidnapping trial, let's put in the evidence of when Jeffrey Willis may have been the person to kidnap her. Can you talk us through some of the weaknesses of this case, this testimony, and clearly the strengths?
The weakness is that there's no correlation, direct correlation between her testimony as to what happened with regards to a separate incident that's separate and distinct from the case at hand, okay? And so while he may have done something improper, criminal, and disgusting previously, there's no direct nexus here. That's the weakness for the prosecution. The strength, obviously, when you have a 16-year-old girl and you play that 911 call where she's horrified, and she's horrified because of the actions of the defendant that's sitting in court, that hurts. That hurts the defendant, the prosecutor. He's doing like a happy dance in his head, and the jurors are looking over at the defendant thinking that he's a piece of garbage, and that never helps.
How do you even cross-examine this witness?
That's the million-dollar question. I mean, you have to be very, the cross-examination that I would potentially put together would be to just question her about the incident at hand, okay? I wouldn't ask her any questions about what happened previously. I would ask her, did you know the defendant the victim in this case? Were you there at the gas station? Did you witness anything directly, so on and so forth? So my cross-examination would be geared towards the issue at hand, not the collateral consequences and the testimony with regards to the abduction that she's talking about. Because what can you do?
Yeah, and listen, when you don't have the body in the Jessica Heeringa case, you're using any kind of circumstantial evidence to tie the defendant to this kidnapping and murder. We'll take a break. When we come back, we're going to play more of the victim testifying. Take a look. We'll be back.
Do you recall at that point in time whether or not you still had your shoes on?
No, I don't. I don't think I did, but I don't know.
You don't remember whether or not?
I don't remember.
Okay. And do you recall at that point in time whether or not recognizing or seeing that you'd been injured?
No.
All right. Ultimately, where do you run to?
A girl's house. A stranger's house.
Did you know this person?
No.
And what happens when you get to this house?
She was outside and she let me come in. She opened up her door a little bit so I could come in, and I ran in and I told her someone was after me and to call 911.
Okay. And did this woman in fact do that?
Yes.
Now, at some point in time, do you recall actually getting on the phone with dispatch? Talking to the dispatcher?
Yes.
All right.
Pretty incredible. You're listening to the moments when this young girl claims she was almost kidnapped and kidnapped and who knows what else at the hands of Jeffrey Willis. Now, you heard at the end she was able to get to a nearby woman's home and call 911. Let's play that 911 phone call right now.
When did you pull out the gun?
When I started getting out of the car, I don't want to do anything.
Okay, so you pulled the gun when you tried to get out?
Yeah.
What way did he leave?
He chased me. He was chasing me.
Where was he chasing you?
I don't know.
You don't know where he went?
No, he said he was at your house and we stopped. I think I had a family. He was just kidding. I just
Okay. Were you assaulted at all?
No. But I need to go to the hospital. I jumped out of the car. My own.
Okay. Do you want an ambulance?
Yeah.
When are you injured?
All over your stress, all over me.
And that is the woman that helped rescue this young girl. Saam, I'm back with you. I want to ask you a question here. At one point, the camera was just focused on Jeffrey Willis and his legal team because the victim, or the alleged victim, was not allowed to be shown on camera. They're passing notes to each other. Like, what is that communication as a witness like this is testifying? What do you think he was asking his attorneys?
You know, it all depends. It's super subjective, but I'll tell you, there's an objective theme that we attempt to instill in our clients when you have witnesses that are damaging and how to act and protocol, because jurors, much like yourself, notice people's reactions when you have damaging and emotional testimony. And you know, normally we tell our clients, keep your head down, don't make eye contact, don't engage and show stupid faces and bad expressions. Just sit down and we'll communicate via notes, and make it appear as if we're intensely listening in preparation for our defense, because that's what we're doing.
And everybody was watching that line of testimony. Really interesting case. When we come back, we're going to reveal the verdict in the Jeffrey Willis case and see whether or not the victim or the alleged victim speaking out, how did it pay off? We'll be right back. All right, everybody, welcome back to Law and Crime. We are coming to the conclusion of the Jeffrey Willis recap. Now, we've played you the testimony of the victim or the alleged victim, Madison Nygaard, who claims that she was almost abducted by Jeffrey Willis. She was allowed to testify in that case that we covered, the case of Jessica Heeringa, the gas station clerk that disappeared in 2013. Jeffrey Willis was on trial for her abduction and murder. So what did the jury come back with? What verdict? Take a look.
Please rise. People v. Jeffrey Thomas Willis, case number 166040FC. Count 1, open murder. Guilty of first-degree murder. Guilty of first-degree premeditated and first-degree felony murder. Count 2, kidnapping. Guilty.
Okay, thank you. You may be seated. Ladies and gentlemen, you've heard the verdict announced by the bailiff that you find the defendant guilty of first-degree murder based on both first-degree premeditated and first-degree felony murder. Is there anyone who disagrees with that verdict? Please raise your hand. All right, you've heard the verdict announced that you find the defendant guilty of kidnapping. Is there anybody who disagrees with that verdict? Please raise your hand. All right, let the record reflect that no one indicated disagreement. Do you care to have the jury polled, Mr. Hilson?
No, sir.
Mr. Johnson?
No, sir.
All right, thank you. Then this will stand as the verdict of the jury.
Guilty of kidnapping and murder. And before we play you and reveal what the sentence is, it should be noted that he has already been convicted of the murder of Rebecca Bletch and was serving a life sentence, a life in prison sentence on that. Saam, as you listen to that, do you ever wonder, you think, well, could the defense have done more? Was there an avenue that they should have explored? Because as we talked about at the top of the program, no body, circumstantial evidence case, strong circumstantial evidence case, but was there an avenue that you would have liked for them to explore more?
You know, without having access to all the discovery and, you know, doing my due diligence, it's kind of hard to answer that question. But like you said, he had a laundry list, he had a checklist of how he commits his crimes, how he abducts them, like kind of had like the torture room in his grandfather's house. Listen, it was circumstantial, but it was extremely strong circumstantial case. So I'm sure the defense team pounded out as hard as they could, but it wasn't enough to overcome not only the circumstantial case, but the prior bad acts with the victim's testimony. It was too much to overcome.
And let me ask you this, really, do you think that the case was made by the testimony of Madison Nygaard? If she didn't testify, would we have seen a guilty verdict?
You know what? I still think that they would have been able to secure a guilty verdict. Well, you know what? I don't know, because her testimony kind of ties in that van that was seen at the gas station. And that's an instrumental part of the case. So you know what? Maybe not. But I think her testimony was absolutely necessary for the prosecution, and it was just devastating.
Now, before Jeffrey Willis was ultimately sentenced for the kidnapping and murder of Heeringa, he provided a statement to the court. Let's see what he said.
The maxim, Occam's razor, which states, in explaining something, no more assumptions should be made than what is necessary, comes to mind here. The fact that one of Jessica's many lovers, Jess Ammerman, who was caught skulking around the station by the North Shores Police Department's Detective Casher that night, around that same time, was discounted as well. It seems blatantly obvious to me that this town and country van the police so adamantly searched for had absolutely nothing to do with Ms. Heeringa's disappearance, and was all just a prosecutorial red herring. I too fell into this group of fantasy thinkers, believing the police could be trusted with not fucking up an investigation. I refuse to believe my best friend in the world, a North Shores policeman, who would frequently talk about how others in his profession would bend the rules, lie in their reports and while under oath, and back each other up in that old boys network, Brothers in Brown, if things got tight. These words, I paraphrase from an anti-federalist letter, imbue what was so very important and imparted in our Bill of Rights. Due process is at the very heart of our jurisprudence. If a person is denied this, as I was, through deliberate deceptions, purposeful manipulations of the theft of my attorney's notes and discussions, or the court's failure to render a proper decision after my third assigned public defender, Brian Hostka, turned turncoat for money to the prosecutor's office, then shared that very same attorney-client ballistics information to the state's Lieutenant Jeffrey Crump his first week on the job in August of 2017, so that Crump could alter his ballistics report number 25 on August 25th of 2017, just in time for court. How is a citizen to get a fair trial, let alone advice that he can trust? My grandmother, Leola Agneta, sacrificed her well-being to forge a better America. My grandfather, Lawrence Wesley, fought to protect my presumption of innocence. Both believed, as my parents, Pamela and Lawrence, did, that all people are equal under the law and deserve this right. In Gideon v. Wainwright, the Supreme Court expounded.
Willis was ultimately sentenced to life in prison for this crime, but Saam, he's throwing everybody under the bus and saying he's innocent. What do you think about that?
I mean, let me tell you, as a former prosecutor and as a defense attorney that's had defendants make statements somewhat similar to this, it's nothing shocking. You know, what he's doing right now is he's setting up his ineffective assistance of counsel claim against his attorney, and he's airing out the inconsistencies or the deficiencies or whatever evidence that wasn't admissible in trial, because he's hoping that if he does get a retrial, that this is something that may be able to curry his favor with potential jurors down the line. So this is a tactical decision by someone that's spent their time in hoping to set up a retrial down the line and laying down the groundwork to hurt the evidence that hurt him.
Could it work? He's throwing in details we haven't heard before. What happens if some of this is true?
Well, I mean, listen, that's what he's hoping for. He's hoping that there's a mistrial for whatever reason, whether it's a legitimate trial issue or if it's an ineffective assistance of counsel issue. And then at the, when he gets a second bite of the apple, that jurors, which they often do when they're curious, and what they say, curiosity kills cat, they start researching the case and then they listen to the statement. And then they start questioning whether or not this person was honest and if this girl had a history and so on and so forth. So, yeah, I mean, this could potentially help him down the line, but you never know.
Well, if there's any update in Jeffrey Willis, we'll make sure to let everybody know. Saam, thanks so much for coming on. We can't wait to have you back.
Okay. Take care.
All right, everybody, let's take a break. When we come back, our second trial of the day we're covering, James Colley. We'll be right back. Stay tuned.